I read a story in a magazine or a paper several years ago about a woman in Sweden who had a rare eating disorder. And because of her disease, she was forced to eat 30 pounds of food a day just to stay alive. She would die if she ate only 3 normal meals a day. She always needed more, sadly. And yet, I personally fantasize about eating a lot of food and not gaining weight. And it's a fantasy. But 30 pounds a day, I don't think so. I don't know about you, but I'm always amazed at how much the average offensive or defensive lineman in the NFL eats. Remember the defensive center, Vince Wilcock? During the season, or during this time of year when they were doing the preseasons, he was eating 3 triple whoppers for lunch. It's amazing. But they need that weight, and they're athletic as well. It's amazing. So they can afford to eat more than you and I could ever dream of. Now, some people have a harder time resisting the lure of food than others. Paul Harvey, the radio guy, used to tell a story about a guy named Eric Edmonds, who was determined to lose weight. So he went to the Humana Hospital in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and he had his stomach stapled in order to shrink his ample girth. But 48 hours after surgery, he snuck out of his room, raided the hospital refrigerator, and ate so much that he burst his staples. Then he sued the hospital for $500,000 because they hadn't locked the refrigerator. Now, Paul Harvey never says what happened after that, so I guess we didn't get rest of the story. But here's something that won't surprise you. Research shows that the average meal served at a restaurant is 170% larger than what you normally would eat at home. So if you want to lose weight, don't eat out. Now this is my confession. Food's important in my life. I'm sure it is in yours. I love to live by the saying that coffee is what gets me out of bed in the morning, but chocolate's what makes it worth it. And we all have our weaknesses. Today's scripture, we need to realize, is in the context of eating. It is immediately after Jesus had fed the 5,000 with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. What a thrilling day that must have been. And naturally, the crowd that was fed was amazed. In fact, John has them saying, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." But then John also adds, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him a king by force, withdrew again to a mountain to be by himself. Jesus had no intention of becoming an earthly king. That would have been a demotion for Jesus. And it's obvious by now in the scriptures that the reason that Jesus told some of the people that he healed not to share it with anyone is that if the stories got around, he knew that people would try to lure him away from his real mission. You see, he didn't come to set up an earthly kingdom. And that's a good lesson for us Christians today. Healing people, as much as he had compassion for them, was not his real mission either. That was out of compassion. His real purpose was to spread the good news, to usher in the very kingdom of God with his presence. His real purpose was to train his disciples to carry on the work of the kingdom of God after he leaves. His real purpose was to show people through his own life the very nature of God. So under the cover of darkness, after feeding 5,000, he crossed to the other side of the lake of Capernaum. Now note, when he crosses over, this is where Jesus walks on water. But that's a sermon for another day. So many people got into boats and they followed him. They came after him. And when they found him on the other side of the lake, they said, "Rabbi, how did you get here?" Well, he avoided telling them exactly how he got there. But he did say this. He says, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate your loaves and had your fill. Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval." Do you know that hunger? That hunger for the food that never spoils? Do you feel a hunger for the very bread of life? Not the bread we buy at Stop and Shop or at Happy Fish. But do you hunger for the bread that only Christ can supply? We all know what physical hunger is. For most of us, real hunger is not much more than a minor inconvenience. But we know a little bit about physical hunger. Some of us barely finish lunch and we're thinking about what we're going to eat for supper. I recently read that the normal person in the USA spends 35,000 hours of their lives eating. 35,000 hours. That would be 8 years, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now obviously we eat a lot. Obviously it's important to us. But do we get hungry for that which will truly satisfy us? Oh sure, we all know about physical hunger. But what do we know about spiritual hunger? See, many of us have within us a deep emptiness that nothing physical can fill. It's a longing to be created or be connected to our Creator. There's something missing in our lives. Something missing, and in its place, we substituted all sorts of things. It's kind of like the old country song, looking for love in all the wrong places. We look to material things, to stuff. We look to power or sex or accomplishment. But none of those things truly satisfy the spiritual hunger. We're always left wanting more. Remember the famous tennis player Boris Becker? He was for a while on top of the tennis world. At the same time, he was on the brink of suicide. In his own words, he said, "I had won Wimbledon twice, once as the youngest player ever. I was rich. I had all the material possessions I needed. It's the old song of movie stars and pop stars who commit suicide. They have everything and yet they're so unhappy. I had no inner peace. I felt like a puppet on a string." And Boris Becker's not alone, is he? We think now of Kate Spade, Anthony Bourdain, and many more. You don't have to be a celebrity to feel that emptiness. The echoes of a hollow life pervade our culture. So many have learned that when you work so hard to get to the top, there's nothing there. That's been the experience of many high achievers, that when you get to the top, there's nothing there. And it's so sad to see young lives ended because of that emptiness within. And many people today look deep within their hearts and they find nothing but emptiness there. We ask questions like, why are we here? Where are we headed? What does this all mean? And for many people, there are not satisfying answers to that question. Many years ago, there was a brilliant French writer who spoke really for some of the best educated people of the times. His name was Albert Camus. I had to read a lot of Camus when I was in philosophy classes in college. But Camus's view of life was simply that life was absurd. That was his big word, absurd. That there was no reason for life, no meaning, no purpose behind it. His contention was that it was even foolishness for one to try to predict the way life would go. That we are at the mercy of blind chance, and what we do and how we act simply doesn't matter at all. Now, sadly and weirdly prophetic, Camus died in a car wreck while trying to maneuver a curve in the road at 90 miles an hour. The brightest light in French literature, a Nobel Prize winner, went out like in a moment. And next day, the headline in the Paris paper simply said, "Absurd." If we believe that we are solely dependent upon reason, that we too must admit that Camus was right, that life is ultimately absurd, and that there's no real reason for it. Like the old song, is that all there is? But about the same time that Camus was writing, there was a theologian by the name of Paul Tillich who reminded us of three fears that had gripped humankind. Before the Christian era, he said it was the fear of death. During the Middle Ages, he says it was the fear of guilt. And then Tillich said, and today it's the fear of meaninglessness. That mad search for escape, for nirvana, for death itself is a result of this fear of meaninglessness. There's no joy, there's only fun. There's no peace, there's only aspirin. There's no hope, there's only alcohol. If life is absurd, then no matter which way we turn, it'll be the wrong way. That was the basic philosophy of Albert Camus. It's so sad that someone like Albert Camus never tried to turn to Jesus. Because it was to fill this emptiness, this meaninglessness, that Christ came into our world. I am the bread of life, says Jesus. You can search all over this earth to find the one thing that's missing in your life. But until you feed on Jesus, you'll never be satisfied. I was once standing in line at the supermarket. You've probably had the same experience. There was a mother and a little boy. And he was sitting in the seat in the carriage. And he was very unhappy because his mother wouldn't buy him a piece of candy from the rack that he was next to. And his disappointment rather crescendoed. And finally, this frustrated mother blurted out, "What can I tell you, Billy? Life sucks, isn't it?" Imagine having that as a truth that you're upgrading your life on. The kind of truths that we tell ourselves and our children will mold us and will mold them. But the truth is that God created a good world, a life that is good when we live it for God and when we base our lives on His Word. When we live away from God, life does suck and then you die. But when you live your life for God, life makes sense because it's based on the truth. And because your life is based on the truth, it has meaning. Build my life on God, on good works, on God works. I am the bread of life, said Jesus. After he had fed 5,000 or more, they said 5,000 men, plus women and children, all the bread they could eat. What does this mean to us? What does it mean to you? You know, the process of going from grain to bread is a demanding one. The seed must be planted, then it must grow. When the grain's ripe, it must be cut down and ground into flour. Before it become bread, it must pass through an oven. Bread is the end result of planting and harvesting and heating. And Jesus, the bread of life, endured the same process. He was born into this world. He was cut down, bruised, and beaten on the threshing floor of Calvary. He passed through the fire of God's wrath for our sake. He suffered because of others' sake, the righteous one for the unrighteous ones. And he went through it all. And then he was put to death and then made alive to bring us to God. The bread of life. Jesus lived up to that title. But you know, an unopened loaf does a person no good. You can believe it. You can acknowledge it. But you've got to open it up to be fed by it. Have you received the bread of life? Have you received God's forgiveness and love and grace? You may know that Jesus is the bread of life, but have you tasted the bread? Those are the questions that you and I need to ask today, if we haven't already. On this day of communion, which we celebrate that Jesus is the bread of life. The world, our world, is still hungry for true bread. And Jesus Christ is that bread. Sir, the people said in response to Jesus' teachings, give us that bread. And then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. And that's true. The greatest need that each of us has to feed upon Christ. For Christ is the bread of life. Amen.